with a learning disability who has a primary disability of depression. The student may receive treatment for the learning disability, academic interventions, and not the necessary psychiatric interventions to benefit the child. There are also students, when these students have a double coexisting disabilities, they have what we call a double deficit model. This is often characterized by students that have significant difficulties compared to a student with just a single disability. The strengths of a student are often masked when they have coexisting disabilities, and in the same way their needs are masked. There are special factors to consider for English language learners with mild disabilities. Teachers should consider their language function, acculturation, conceptual knowledge, thinking abilities, cultural values and norms, and teaching and learning styles. Let's review what has been discussed so far. The questions are similar to types of questions you will have on your final exam. Learning disabilities are considered lifelong disabilities. True or false? The answer is true. Students may have learned specific skills and have learned to compensate for the learning disability, but the underlying deficits do not disappear. The two major types of communication disorders are speech impairments and language impairments, B, speech impairments and articulation impairments, C, language impairments and stuttering, D, language impairments and disfluencies, E, none of the above. The answer is A, speech impairments and language impairments. Speech deficit affects the way one communicates in spoken language. Language impairments can impair how one receives information, which is receptive language, or how one communicates, which is expressive language. Which of the following is true about students with ADHD? Onset prior to age 5, occur for at least 2 years, can be related to other medical and psychiatric conditions, interferes with performance in 2 or more settings, none of the above. The answer is D. In other words, if the problems are only in one classroom or one type of setting and do not occur across school settings or across classrooms, the student more than likely does not have ADHD or ADD. The major cause of EBD is home environment, genetics, community, peer pressure, none of the above. The answer is none of the above. There is no major cause that contributes to the severity of the disability. There is no major cause, for the disability, but all those factors can contribute to the severity of the disability. Students with MMR generally will not be able to work, contribute to society, learn easily, maintain good social relationships, none of the above. The answer is C, learn easily. Learning for these students can be very difficult. In the next section, we will talk about the identification of instructional goals for students with mild disabilities. Identification of goals often occurs and is determined in the preliminary phase of identification. They are most often determined through assessment, standardized assessment, which can be at the state, national, or local levels, curriculum-based assessment, curriculum-based measurement, and informal assessment devices, such as reading inventories, writing portfolios, and mathematics exams. Stop and think about what you have learned about the different mild disability types. Where would you typically need to apply actions? In content, for example, would the student need a different reading text? In instructional strategies, would the student need a different instructional approach? In instructional setting, does the student need a special group setting or a study carrel? Or student behaviors, does the student need a behavior support plan? Let's look at a typical student with learning disability. They're not all the same, but we will look at a possibility. And let's look at each section. In content, often for these students, the reading level most impacts their ability to access content, but they may be able to think abstractly, so information may need to be presented verbally and reading adapted. Instructional strategy needs for these students are often that these students need additional help, one-to-one instruction, for example. Once they acquire the skills, they sometimes have a good understanding of the skills and they may be highly motivated. For students with learning disabilities, often will need assistance in acquiring information, but they have good working skills with peers. And this is not always, but is a potential possibility. And then in looking at student behaviors, the student with learning disabilities may generally have excellent behaviors, but simply need assistance with study and learning strategies. Let's look at an example of a student with a speech and language impairment. Let's look at each section again. For content needs, the student with a language impairment often has insufficient language abilities and problems with abstract thinking, but can read sufficiently. This was different than the student with a learning disability who could not read or decode words, but could understand the concepts. For instructional strategy needs, the student may need additional help in acquiring and understanding strategies, but has no difficulty with attention. As far as instructional setting needs, the student may need assistance in acquiring information, but otherwise is able to work independently. Finally, student behaviors. Like the student with LD, this student may generally have excellent student behaviors. Let's look at a different type of student, one with a attention deficit disorder. In content needs, the student may have a lack of interest in the topic, and this may impact learning, but the student can read sufficiently, they have the prerequisite skills, and they have sufficient language to complete the task. Their problem is lack of interest or attention. For instructional strategies, the student may not be motivated to use the strategies or to keep attention to task, but when the student attends, they learn strategies quickly. Instructional setting needs. The student may not be able to attend to the task or work appropriately with peers, but can acquire the information easily. Finally, student behaviors. This student may have few strengths in this curricular element and may require some type of behavioral support or support for maintaining their attention in class. Stop and think about students with emotional or behavioral disabilities and students with mild mental retardation. List what you will believe will be the curricular elements and strengths and needs of these students. Let's quickly look at students with BD. These students may need no accommodations for content or instructional strategies. However, the instructional setting may be very important for these students. For example, placement in the classroom may be extremely important. And again, behavior, like the student with ADD, these are the students who most often require some type of behavioral intervention or support. Providing instruction for students with mild disabilities requires careful planning. To adapt the content, Mastroperi and Scruggs suggest identify the scope and sequence of content, that the student can successfully complete and be specific to the objectives that the student can complete. Students with mild disabilities often require more time to learn. Therefore, it's important to estimate the time to teach. Be sure to monitor progress and adjust pace. This does not mean slowing down the pace of instruction, but altering it at different points to ensure that the students are learning. Provide the students with ongoing reviews. Students with mild disabilities often have memory difficulties and need more review of past learning than students without disabilities. Be sure to relate the instructional activities to content. Successful instructional adaptations include the following evidence-based practices: establishing prior knowledge or skills, very critical before teaching a new task. Discuss what is to be learned. Be sure the student understands the purpose of what they are learning. Model the task and the skill to be learned. Give the student adequate time to memorize steps and procedures. Students with mild disabilities do not pick up things automatically and may need to be provided with extra memorization time. In the same way, students with mild disabilities often need additional guided practice time, additional prompting to stay on task, and reminders of what to do. Students with mild disabilities need continuous feedback more than students without disabilities. And students with disabilities often need opportunities for independent practice. And this independent practice should occur across settings and tasks. For example, if you teach the student how to write in your classroom, you want to make sure that they are applying that same skill for writing in another classroom. Students with mild disabilities should be provided alternative methods for response. In other words, oral responses versus writing to get at basic content knowledge. Students with mild disabilities need clear and concise expectations. They often need individualized instruction. Presentations often need to modify. We saw that in the video with Alex about noise. A presentation that has a lot of music may be distracting for these students or for some of these students. Consider using peer tutoring. Provide student choices. It empowers students and improves their motivation. Shorten assignments. I don't mean dummy them down, but shorten the amount of problems to be solved, but use the same amount of content. Simplify the reading level. Be sure to get student input and attain their commitment to learn what is being taught. And be sure to reward students for their successes.